News gang is here, and the grave arguments about the famine dead of Turkana and Baringo just go on. Who dropped the ball? The denial party, and why this famine is slightly better than the last one. Yes, you heard it right. Also on the show, we shall examine the gathering dark clouds at the Supreme Court and the courts below. Question is, who will judge the honorable judges? We start with what sounded more like the search for a hunger death certificate. Let's hear some sound bites from this week.
There is a lot of fake news also around what is happening in Kenya. For example, we were told the other day that 11 people have died. That is not true, from where I sit. The chief and the other fellow who actually faked death, we've taken them in for questioning, because these are people who are taking a very serious matter involving human life and playing around with it.
There is no death that has been verified as a direct cause of this drought. In 2017, where we had majority of our counties in the alarm stage, we had a situation in the entire Horn of Africa. Do you know in Kenya, we have a record international, and for the first time, we were actually celebrated by the international community for the interventions we brought, that no lives were lost in 2017. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, so the DP categorical, this is fake news, no one has died. In fact, the people who are faking these deaths, the chiefs who are faking the deaths, we've taken them in because they are playing with a serious matter of life and death. Eugene Wamalwa, Devolution CS, says there is no death that has been verified. And of course, going ahead to talk about how this is better than 2017, which was apparently more serious and that sort of thing. This death question, what is really going on, Yvonne?
Yet the contradictions continue. You know, about half an hour ago, I spoke to the Tiati Member of Parliament, who's there on the ground. He's been there, and he says he confirms 5 deaths, the identities of whom he has given us. You know, we just wouldn't release those names out of respect to the families. And he says there's many more. There's 11. So it seems to me there's a line between those who are on the ground and those who are in Nairobi, and those who are on the ground who are saying the deaths have happened. And Enoch Sikolia went to some of the homes where they say they have just buried their loved ones. So Nairobi versus on the ground, you know, some of those issues that are coming up.
I would understand. When people speak from Nairobi and they tell us there are no deaths, I believe them, because there's no reported death from drought in Karen or in Runda, or any part of Nairobi, at least so far. But when there are people who speak from Baringo, from West Pokot, from those other areas, and they tell us there are deaths, and they even show us the graves, I'm inclined to believe those there, because they know those people. Probably we will get a better confirmation about deaths by people who are speaking from Nairobi, if there will be one in those areas that I've mentioned.
You know, the question is, denials to what end? What is the purpose of denying that people are dying because of famine? It's not the government's fault that there is drought. It's a natural weather phenomenon. And people could die, and in Yvonne's explainer last week, she demonstrated how people can die, how a human being can die from hunger. Hunger is not a physical thing that comes armed with a panga and slashes its victims. It causes the body to become weak. It could even be a body of somebody who was sick. It only worsens the situation, and people die. But the strangest thing that we're also seeing is the management of the communication around this issue. Apart from the denials, now we are also seeing the targeting of the messenger. Both the Deputy President and the Interior Cabinet Secretary have spoken about this chief. Now, there's some footage that just emerged this evening, and I could ask Robert if you can show us the chief who is surrounded by his seniors.
Yes.
Only this evening.
Yeah, he's called Chief Jack Ronay. He's from a sub-location called Kositei. And he's one of the first people to have spoken about death, and that was on Saturday last week, if I'm not mistaken. And he had said 4 people had died and hundreds of livestock had perished due to lack of water and pasture. But this is what happened to him after he had said that.
Kwa hivyo kwa ufupi hakuna mtu amekufa kwa sababu ya njaa. Ni vile walifuatilia huyu mtu. Pole. Hakuna mtu kwa yake ambao unaweza sema amekufa kwa sababu ya njaa. Hapana, hakuna ripoti ambayo ikiambo ya kwamba kuna watu wanakomplain tu ya njaa. Kwa hivyo hiyo vitu ya magazeti wameandika waliwekelea. Yes sir.
So look at that. The chief right there in a situation where he's having basically to survive, to defend his job. He's having to reverse the position he gave earlier. He's saying,
so kwa ufupi.
Yes, it's a very intimidating atmosphere, and one would not understand why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, when you look at that intimidation, those are probably all his seniors. And poor guy, they're all his seniors, and he's scared, he's worried, because he's been mentioned by the deputy president, the minister Matiang'i, huyo chief ambaye alisema hivyo. But for him, he was speaking from what he had seen on the ground. When we say 1.1 million people from 13 counties are facing starvation, the drought and starvation is not an event. It's not something that needs to shock us. Yeah. In fact, Gashuri, you said this when we were doing our show on Tuesday morning. It's shameful that a country that has been independent for almost 60 years, kusema watu wanakufa kwa sababu hawana chakula. Hata wacha hawakufi, watu hawana chakula, wanaishi na njaa. That's very, very shameful, and it should not be something that should even be spoken about in a country as this. But now, when you talk about people who have died or have not died, we had the local, other than Chief Jack Ronay, we had an MCA and even a governor of West Pokot, Wan Lonyangapuo, talking about the deaths. So, Robert, can we listen to those sound bites of people from the ground, local leaders in those areas?
Those who succumb to hunger, kwa sababu ya hii ni watu 17. Mimi nataka niambie chiefs na MCS, don't be intimidated. Kama iko njaa, sema iko njaa.
Tukisema watu wamekufa, tunasema ukweli. Na hata ukisema tuende tuangalie kaburi, tutakupeleka tukwambie ndio huyu mwenye alikufa.
Hata watu wawili confirmed death around Akulo. Akulo ni at the extreme end of my county, bordering Tiaty, bordering Turkana South.
Gashuru unasema watu wa Nairobi hawezi sema until someone dies.
But here's another contradiction, sorry, that I must point out, that, you know, the Baringo governor, Stanley Kiptis, was on Daybreak here this morning. He said there were no deaths. Yet he and William Kamket, who's the MP for Tiaty, went to the ground together. One says there are deaths, another says there are none. I mean, but it's the amount of energy that's being expended.
But that very governor was speaking on Citizen Radio today at 1 p.m. Where he said that hatujathibitisha wamekufa from what. But here's what is striking. Of course, denying famine deaths has been the norm for as long as I can remember, since the days of Sharif Nasser, when he was in OP and distributing food into Turkana and all these places. But what is striking is this, that it is almost as if we are able to demonstrate no one died, then this thing is not serious enough.
Yes.
Because as far as we can tell, if there is a report that is done by a government agency that says 1.1 million people are on the verge of starvation and some are already starving, it is a serious thing. And in fact, the energy one would imagine would go toward trying to deal with this situation. Because if one person died or 17 or 1,000 people have gone for 1 week without food and they haven't died, it's really irrelevant. The problem is hunger. Can we just deal with that? But it seems to me that the government is very concerned about the reputation issue, that, hey, people died under our watch and the promises they had made. So from a political standpoint, you would understand why they behave like that. But I think that in terms of the message that then is sent to the people who are actually dealing with these things, because some of them are still able to listen to the radio, for example, their leaders are able to tell them that, oh, this is what the government is saying. It sends a disheartening message, in my view, to the people who are down there. But
you know the contradiction is, these are the very same people 2 years ago, actually a year and a half ago, that leaders went out to and promised them heaven if they were to elect them to the presidency, to gubernatorial positions, to parliamentary positions and county assembly positions. And then when they hear you say no one has died and somebody has lost a relative, then it sends a message of, one, inconsistency, and two, being deceitful. I had the CS for Interior say that the chief who said that is a former chief, was sacked because he was drunk. And I believe him if probably he says the guy was drunk. You know, one of the characteristics of drunk people, they're very truthful. I saw a cartoon by Patrick Gadara today that, so probably he's, if I was to quote what Patrick Gadara said in that cartoon, drunk and honest, drunk and truthful. So if that is the accusation, I think that chief is spot on.
I think the narrative is very well choreographed, starting from the press conference that was held at the Deputy President's offices. And I just want, as Robert, to go to the soundbite from the National Drought Management Authority. I think that's Odor. Yeah, let's listen to him.
There are many government ministries that deal with directly with food security, including even the county governments. One, there is the National Drought Management Authority that deals with the 12 counties that you mentioned. They do a consistent monitoring of the situation on the ground, and this NDMA is domiciled in the office of the president. That's why I'm saying, as a department, we may not comment too much on what goes on with the information they gather and how they respond to it.
Do you want?
We participate in all these meetings, and actually we give this information consistently to all arms of government, including the Ministry of Agriculture, NDMA. We are in touch with them, and we share this information across all the government sectors.
But the reports you have gotten from that exercise, they have not been able to link those deaths directly to drought. Those deaths are linked to maybe sickness and other issues.
So that's it. The first guy is Samuel Mwangi from the Met Department.
Yes.
But essentially saying that we know these things in advance, that there's going to be a drought and it's going to have...
And we speak out, we say it.
We speak about it, it's shared widely in government. And then you have, of course, the CEO of the National Drought Management Authority saying, hey, these things, if someone died, it is because of diseases and other causes. Interesting, Yvonne. He clearly didn't watch your take last week.
No, he clearly didn't. But what I would be concerned with if you hear reports of deaths, rather than have categorical denials, why not say we've heard of reports of 5, we are going out to investigate. The intimidation that we're seeing is, you know, kwa kusema ukweli, this is not happening. That for me is what I find interesting, that has plagued our conversations, at least from the leaders and the persons responsible with this. Who died, they didn't die, this was not the number, this is fake news, this is what it is. You know, it just in terms of optics, it seems to stick to...
when you talk about doctors' reports and all of that, some of those guys have never seen a doctor.
No,
like they don't
and
have
never,
hospitals.
probably never will.
Even when they were alive, they didn't see a doctor.
Yes.
And you expect now a doctor to come and...
There you go. And it also seems to just sort of tie into that narrative of no single Kenyan will die from hunger. This was in the manifesto. And it seems like all of these things are just made to live up to that.
And what upsets me also, Yvonne, is the images that we've been showing. Robert, I hope you can be showing them as I speak, of from Baringo to Turkana to Tana River, showing people suffering, people who haven't eaten. Like the lady there, that's in Turkana. That fruit, we call it what? The mukoma. Yes,
it
mukoma.
Is hard.
It is really, really
like
hard.
Chewing that, even for someone who has energy.
Who has energy to chew that, and look at them.
Yeah.
This mamas are from Baringo. And they're talking about how they have no food. And in fact, yesterday, Akina Sikoli, our crew went, and that uji that the mamas are drinking, it's our crew that made it for them. They had absolutely nothing. And because they are old, they are aged, they are unable to travel long distances to look for food and water. There were 6 old ladies who had been left there. Their children had all gone away to look for water and food. And they had not eaten for up to 3 days. That is the reality on the ground. We are not making this up.
And I think the greatest worry this time should be about a clear, concerted effort to suppress flow of information from the field. The chiefs have been taken care of. You will not hear from the chiefs. Government officials will not tell you what is going on the ground. And if people are dying, then you will not know from government. I also notice, rather curiously, that Red Cross, which has been a very reliable source of information from the field, is not giving as detailed information as it used to. Red Cross has always walked the journey of such times with the country, and they will always be one of the stops journalists would refer to in reporting how serious a situation is, especially in as far as the situation like famine is concerned. But this time, you saw a very careful statement from Abbas Goulet today, who will talk about everything else except numbers and even the deaths. They'll say there are some deaths, but they'll give a very, very similar line like that of government, that we can't draw a direct link between the death and the hunger. So it's a very, very tough time for information.
It is indeed, yeah.
You talk about tough time for information. The aggregate is the question of shame for the government. You know, a government that cannot be able to feed its people has a serious problem. You know, the easiest way to know as a father or as a parent that you're losing it is when you cannot be able to feed your children. So this is the father of the nation is the government, and in this case the president. So when you say, I don't want to say the deputy father is the deputy president, when you turn out and say no person has died, yet the situation is directly opposite in Mashinani. If you're to come and say, by the way, 10 people have died, you know, people will start questioning, okay, and do you have the moral authority to govern if people are dying as a result of hunger?
Right.
And you see, it's a contrast, because a few weeks ago, we were talking about farmers in the country's breadbasket who were unable to sell their maize.
Yeah.
Why? Because there was a dispute about the prices and the capacity and so on and so forth. So you can imagine, there are people who have thousands and thousands of bags in their homes of maize, and not far away from them, there are people who are dying of hunger. And most importantly, look at what the government is supplying. It is supplying maize, beans, fat. So they're supposed to cook with what?
Okay. When you talk about the maize, I'm sorry, Yvonne, because she mentioned the maize in places where there's too much of it. There's a farmer called Mark Meut. We had the footage earlier this week in our bulletin. And he was one of those who had so much maize in his home. I wish we had the pictures. I'm told we don't have it ready yet. And he just lives in Kitale. And I was thinking, how far is Kitale from Baringo? It's about 169 kilometers. It takes about 3 hours, 30 minutes to get there. And then from Turkana to Kitale is about 234 kilometers. Now, during elections, we are able to safirisha ballot boxes and ballot materials to every corner of this country. During exams, national exams, KCP, KCSE, we are able to transport exam materials to every corner of this country. Why can't we go 3 hours, 30 minutes from where? What is happening?
Indeed, and we'll go to early warning in just a moment because just what the Met Department had talked about. But you had mentioned the idea of access. How is it that one part of the country has surplus and the other does not? And even the CS Wamalo brought this up. And there's an organization called the Route to Food Initiative. They put up some research and they talked about food security in the country not being a problem of production, but rather a problem of access and distribution. And that is what Leila Libertrue, who wrote a beautiful article in the Business Daily this week. And she also talked about the budget policy statement and where we are putting our money and does it make sense in the way in which we're doing it. We continue to put a lot of money in large-scale farming, which is all right, but a majority of the farmers, of the food in this country comes from small-scale farmers. So where is that? Are we even supporting food diversity? So the Galana is my pet project.
Yeah, you talk about it a lot.
Yes. Okay.
So I want to listen to the soundbite by one Minister Kunjuri about dams.
We are not at all behind schedule in government intervening in the drought situation we have in the country.
We have put into place about 31 dams that are going to be constructed before the rains, and that will now add the issue of us mitigating every time there is drought. We are coming up with a new plan.
Now, a few things come to mind.
Number one, every time I hear dams, I get hives.
Aurora and Kimwarel, 26 months, nearly 3 years later, there's nothing on the ground. Tuliambua, it's the most expensive thicket in the country. It's worth 21 billion. That's one. Two, if I remember my school nikifundishwa mambo ya long rains, supposed to have started around end of March, early April. Saizi leo tunakaribia end of March. So let's say even the rains delay and come in June. Tutajenga 31 dams in 2 months.
That's a very good question, because how long does it take to construct a dam?
Well, going by our standards.
Going by our standards. And even by any standards, dams are not very simple structures. They are very complex, actually engineering projects. It's not as easy as buying buckets. I mean, we're talking about putting 31 in place before the rains. The rains are coming in April, hopefully.
But not as easy as buying towels.
As soon as tonight.
Yes, that's tonight. Yeah. It's any time now. But
we could assume it was a slip of the tongue about
or which rains, I guess.
SLIP or SLEEP.
Okay. But because I think the other dimension to this dam question is that it seems to me that we have come to the conclusion that it is only dams that can save us from the problems that we have. There are many people that you speak to who beg to differ, that it is not just dams that can help us. It is also about asking the question, why don't we have water in some of all these places? Because there is a reason why some of the places that used to have water don't have water. So you don't see as much effort also being put in conserving the areas where water actually comes from, because the natural water is usually from all those water towers that we have in the country, for example. But you see all the destruction that happens there and that sort of thing. But then now we are saying that finally the magic bullet that we have is to build 57, I think it was, dams across the country.
Yes.
And there is only so much that the country can carry in terms of dams. But I think that emphasis needs to also go into where the water used to come from that is actually dry right now.
You're talking about where the water used to come from, Joe, and someone even on Twitter is talking about it, and I think the Minister Wamalo spoke about it when he was here, talking about the tropical cyclone known as Idai, the one that is located in the Mozambican Channel that has caused a lot of destruction in those areas. And it is said that it is actually delaying the northward movement of the rain-bearing intertropical convergence zone. So, Joe, could this be one of the reasons why our rains have delayed, the fact that that is happening in Mozambique? No,
of course, yes. They have said that it has sucked the moisture that was supposed to come this way. It is possible that, I mean, all these weather systems are connected. But I think that is a smaller point, because the cyclone doesn't come all the time.
Right.
And you can't tell me that because the cyclone came last week and that is why we have a problem.
And we were supposed to have reduced our dependence on rain-fed.
But as we speak,
we can latch on any excuse.
But
right
as we
now.
speak, I think that for me, we perhaps are lampooning the national government a bit too much, in my view, because the question of food security in the new dispensation, where we have 47 other governments away from what we have here in Nairobi, I think the county governments also ought to be telling us what they have been doing, because under the new constitution, agriculture has been devolved.
Right.
And among the devolved functions include livestock sale yards, county abattoirs and slaughterhouse services, crop and animal husbandry, plant and animal disease control, and fisheries. And in crop husbandry specifically, there is the provision of extension services, farmer advisory services, construction of grain storage structures, farm inputs such as certified feeds and fertilizers they're supposed to provide. So these people should actually be telling us, governors, instead of coming on TV and saying how many people have died in their places, they're on the ground, they should tell us, but they should also be telling us what they have been doing since they got elected, because they can't be telling us, their job is to make sure that the villages and all are food secure to the extent that they are able, given the roles that they demanded to be devolved so quickly to them. So in my view, the blame must actually go also to the county governments, because they cannot stand there and say, oh, people in Nairobi are supposed to do something.
I think, but only to a lesser extent, because in my view, the counties are becoming the new excuse for the national government. County governments were not in charge of the Galana Kulalu project. County governments are not the ones promising to construct dams. They don't have that kind of money for such mega projects. I think the national government ought to take responsibility for what is going on right now, and just a little share of the responsibility.
But that share, they're not even taking it, because quite frankly, if you look at the actual thing that goes on with agriculture, if you look at what agriculture really is about, the national government has the grand policy issues, and that's why they're talking about dams and irrigation and everything. But there's a question of food security. The counties, for example, that have been trying to promote things like chicken, large-scale chicken farming for different communities and that sort of thing, and encouraging different agricultural practices, making sure that the farmers get extension services that then would boost production and that sort of thing. So the real mechanics of how agriculture happens on the ground is actually in the hands of the county government. So I think we also run the risk of county governments hiding behind all these big projects that the national government has been talking about and is not really doing, instead of also saying, this is what we have done as county government with the resources we have. What exactly is the national government doing?
Let me latch on your last word, resources, because the resources belong to the national government. Actually, it is the one that shares out, divides out. First, are we facing tough economic times? I dare say yes. Does the government have money? Maybe it doesn't. Because look at the 2018-2019 budget. Each of the members of the National Assembly in the 290 constituencies was supposed to receive not less than 100 million shillings in CDF. We are in March, almost end of March. We are fast approaching a new financial year, 2019-2020. Most of these MPs are saying they have only received about 30 million. That's about 30% of the money that they were supposed to receive. The money that they have spent largely on bursaries. County governments are complaining every other day on late disbursement of these resources, and some of the resources that they are getting at the very tail end of the financial year. So where is the money? Because
Francis, look at even the money that they have got. What have they done with it? I think that is a real question that we have to ask of the county governments.
Huge chunks of the money that the county governments are receiving is recurrent expenditure to pay salaries and so on and so forth. How much are they remaining with development?
How much are they stealing, though?
Good question.
But Joe, let me.
I haven't had a county government that said we had these projects we wanted to do related to food security,
but we can't do it because we're not getting
the money. But you see, at the same time, maybe we need to ask maybe the drought situation has given us a window to a more serious discussion as a country. How are we spending the money that we have as a country?
Absolutely.
Because if the taxman is receiving or collecting from us about 1.6 trillion shillings, and we're spending almost 1 trillion shillings in repayment of debts, and we're spending another almost 500 billion shillings in paying salaries, what do we remain with?
Okay,
for development?
I think both
because
your
some
points,
of these
yeah.
things that we're talking
See,
about
where
here
I come from,
Okay, gentlemen?
where I've come from, can I just say this about
where you
I
come from?
Yes,
Okay.
that's a bit important. So
There's a lot of water where you come
so
from.
where I come from, when the mongoose grabs the chicken when it goes out there, you say you blame the mongoose, but you also blame the chicken. Like, what was the chicken doing out there in the bushes?
To be grabbed.
So I really think that the county question must be front and center in this conversation, even if we're going to say the proportion that they bear is this. But I think if we give them a free pass, then it means that there's nothing that will happen on the ground.
All right. Okay.